Okay, so getting back into our coverage over the X-Men, we're going to pick up with Generation X. Now, for Generation X, this is the point where we begin to learn a tad bit more about the origin or the past of Banshee, but also we're seeing our young heroes go up against more difficult characters. Like, for example, in this two-part story arc, you're going to see our young heroes fighting against Omega Red, but also us learning the connection between Omega Red and also Banshee. And all of this does take place over in Generation X issue number 10 and issue number 11. Now, this is picking up where our last video had left off at. You know, the whole idea where we had Mondo officially joining the team. And so as we get into the opening pages, it's really more of us kind of seeing this welcome party for Mondo, and everyone's trying their best to party except for one character, and that would be Jubilee. Now, for Jubilee, she does have a good reason why she's not really focused on the party. Because in our last video for Jubilee, she was having a pool day with Pennis. The problem was that out of nowhere, Pennis decided to have a seizure. Oh, not decide, she had no choice. She had a seizure. And so for Jubilee, she's kind of worried about her, but at the same time, she still wants to know more about Pennis. Because around this time in Marvel Comics, all they knew was her powers, and that was truly it. Now, for Monet, who were originally at first kind of cold towards Jubilee, can kind of realize that for Jubilee, she's very concerned about Pennis. Now, for Monet, she kind of also realized that Banshee is not here, and so she wants to go ahead and make sure that their other instructor, besides Emma Frost, is okay. And that kind of leads into the whole idea of us kind of learning the past of Banshee, because once you do have Monet find Banshee, he is completely knocked out. Well, technically, he's on the verge of death. And so for Monet, she does rush him over to the med lab, where you do have the rest of the team regroup there to kind of figure out what's going on. Now, for Emma, she does go into his mind to be an anchor, to make sure his soul does not move on to the afterlife, but she does tell Monet and the others, you have to find the person who is responsible for what had happened to Banshee and defeat that person, because once you do, you are technically bringing back his actual soul to his body. So go out there and find the person who did this to him. But now we switch over to England. Now, when we do, we're really picking up with three characters. First two is DOA and Gail Egerton. Now, for Gail, she wants revenge against Chamber. And the reason why, because apparently, thanks to Chamber, she's paralyzed from the waist down, meaning that she's wheelchair bound. She wants to get revenge against him for what he has done. And so she's currently working with DOA, another character who's also working for Implate, somebody who also wants Chamber as well. Now, we had also learned in the early parts of our coverage for Implate that he was the guy who kept Pennis as a slave over time. And so there is some kind of connection between Implate and also Pennis. But either way, these three characters are working together, but waiting for the right people to help them achieve their goals. Now, for Generation X, you do have our heroes get into a Jeep to hopefully find the person who is responsible for what had happened to Banshee earlier. But while you have our heroes, our young heroes, doing that, now, for Emma Frost being an anchor for Banshee, she is able to dive into his mind. Now, when she does, she goes back 20 years in the past. Now, this is us kind of learning or beginning the process of us learning about the origin of Omega Red and his connection to Banshee. See, for Banshee, there was this serial killer out there in, I want to say somewhere in Europe. Either way, there was some kind of serial killer. And for Banshee at that time, he was an Interpol agent. But his main goal at that time was to figure out who was the serial killer. Now, he was told, hey, leave this case alone, but he could not stop. And so we see him trying to investigate, except the problem is that he's then confronted by Agent Devereaux. Now, for Devereaux, we have technically saw her in one of our earlier videos of Generation X, and that become very important down the road. But she was assigned to stop Banshee from trying to figure out who is this serial killer, but he was then able to get away from her. But before we're able to, figure out what's going on there, for a brief moment, we do check in on Generation X, the young heroes, as they try their best to figure out who just tried to kill off their teacher. Now, it's also them driving without a license at all. And so, of course, you do have the cops trying to chase them down and arrest them, but you do have our heroes being able to get away from the cops to continue on with their mission. But getting back into the flashback, we kind of see Emma Frost watching Banshee, not kind of, she is watching Banshee to see more about his past, where we do learn here that there was a point in time where you had Banshee working with Magneto, a young Magneto. And the reason why, because back then Magneto knew sooner or later there's going to be a war between mutants and humans. And apparently this serial killer is going to help with the idea of leading into that war. And so it was Magneto who came to Banshee and said, you need to find this serial killer and stop him before he is able to bring in a war between mutants and humans. Now, for the ending of the first chapter, you do have our heroes being able to track down the supposed killer. Now, thanks to the powers of sync, they find the killer, and that person would be Omega Red. So we're now kind of leading into the second half of the story, where it's now really our heroes trying their best to fight against Omega Red. But by the time we kind of dive into the next issue, we're really seeing the entire team has been defeated by Omega Red. Now, here's the thing, because for Omega Red, he has the power of death spores. These death spores go around in your body and slowly weaken you or possibly kill you. Now, for most of the team, like I said, they have been officially defeated, but not killed by Omega Red. But you do have Chambers being able to get back into the battle. Now, for Chamber, he's kind of like, hey, let's go. And the thing is, for Omega Red, he kind of realized that Chamber is on a complete different level when it comes to the rest of Generation X. And so he kind of realized that he's not really able to take him on, and you have Omega Red run away. Now, you do have Skin tell Chamber, like, hey, you need to go after him and bring him back here so that we are technically able to help out Banshee. But getting back over to the flashback, we do see Banshee be confronted by Agent Devereaux. Now, for Agent Devereaux, is her realizing that she's on the wrong side, because the latest victim body has been taken away by Interpol, right? And so it's gone. But Interpol is not really trying to figure out who is this serial killer. And that right there really did bother Devereaux a lot, to the point where now she wants to help Banshee to find this serial killer. Now, there is a brief moment where we do see Jubilee kind of, worry about Penance, but you do have Mondo kind of say, like, hey, everything is going to be okay. And the reason why he's saying that, because he sees Jubilee being that friend who's very worried, but it shows Mondo that this person, Penance, is loved, that she has friends all around her who will be there to hopefully support her. Now, for Omega Red, he does run over to a nearby dam, but he does not get that far when it comes to Chamber trying to chase him down. And so we do see Omega Red wanting to tempt again the idea of killing off Chamber so his soul will leave his body. And so that leads into a battle between those two characters. Now, this kind of leads into the flashback once again, where we kind of learn a tad bit more about the origin of Omega Red. Here's the thing, because the origin for Omega Red is really more broken down in later books down the road, our coverage over the X-Men. But just know that for this part, for Omega Red, he was supposed to be part of a special program for Russia. They wanted their own super soldier, but also use a mutant for that super soldier program. Here comes Omega Red. Now, here's the thing, because for Omega Red, he went over to Europe and began to kill off people. And the reason why, because he wanted Sean Cassidy to be the one to shoot and kill him. Now, there is more to this, but unfortunately, we do have to wait until later books to kind of explain more about why Omega Red is in Europe and why you had the Russian government try their best to keep everything hush-hush. And matter of fact, for the Russian government, they made sure Interpol did not really get involved in the case when it came to Omega Red. Now, at this point in time, for Omega Red, he still had his death spores. So he uses death spores on Sean Cassidy's partner, who unfortunately dies as she falls off the edge. But you do have Sean Cassidy go ahead and shoot Omega Red multiple times, kind of leaving us at first to believe that Sean had killed off Omega Red, even though we already know that's not the case. But back in the present day, you do have Chamber be able to use his psionic energy to kind of defeat Omega Red. So it really shows us here that for Chamber, he is a real powerful character. Will come in the clutch for later stories down the road. Now, the rest of the book is really more of our heroes being able to go back home. And thankfully for our heroes defeating Omega Red, you do have Emma Frost being able to return the soul of Banshee to his body. Now, for Banshee, kind of hates the idea that technically he's part of the reason why Omega Red is who he is at the moment. But we also kind of see for Husk and Chambers, there's some feelings between the two characters, but for Chambers, he's having a hard time expressing how truly he feels about Husk, meaning that sooner or later these two characters are going to date in this book.